I just tanked. And my wife was there. She said, your eyes rolled straight back and you were gone. They put me in intensive care overnight. And at some point during that night, I left my body. And, you get close enough to that death thing that it triggers this automatic thing where the soul will rocket out of the body. And I was flying through this sea of stars, through space. And there was all these colored orbs, these colored stars all around. And it was absolutely euphoric. And I was saying to myself, man, what was that? Meaning my life as Bill.
My epic guest today is Bill Letson. Now, I am aware that he has probably got the most viewed YouTube video out there. I think it's like 8 million views or something more ridiculous on his near-death experience. So when I invited Bill on today, I'm very conscious of that. So a lot of people would have heard his story. Now, we do get into his near-death experience and his story, which is mind-blowing, by the way, which is towards the end of the podcast. It's like 2/3 in. You can check the timestamps below in this YouTube video or on the podcast you're listening to, and you can skip straight to that bit if you want to hear his near-death experience. We also get into a very heartfelt conversation before that, which is what I like to do. And we got it discussing in some fascinating topics around his thoughts around the pineal gland and dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is the spirit molecule. We also got into some of spiritual practices and plant-based medicine journeys that he has been on and his teachings from that, the nature of consciousness. Many, many things are all in there today. I love this conversation with Bill. He's a very grounded, real, and heartfelt soul that just wants to share his experiences and journey, which was awesome. So I'm sure you'll get something out of this today as well. We've also opened our retreat for Croatia at the end of 2024. So we are going to be running a 5-day retreat in Croatia, October. So if you're in Europe, if you're in the States, if you listen to my podcast and you want to come and meet us and join us in person, I know Australia feels a little bit out of the way. So we have a retreat happening in Croatia. You'll be able to fly into Zagreb Airport, which is the capital of Croatia, and be able to get you there from there. Anyway, if you want to find out more information, just head back to liveandflow.co. All right, enjoy this conversation. Much love from me. I will see you soon. Beautiful. Bill, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Good to be here, Guy. Thanks for having me.
It's funny. I've said this many times on the show, but we've been talking off air for nearly 15 minutes, and it's like, wow, this is such great content. We got to just hit record and get on with it, and because it's too good to leave off the table. That's for sure.
Cool.
My first question to you is, though, which I do ask everyone on the show, is that if you were at an intimate dinner party right now, and they just said, "Oh, hey, Bill, how are you? What do you do for a living?" Or how would you respond to that?
Oh, I'd say I'm just a happy retired guy. Spent my life in with the Forest Service and in the fire department. And the question was, what am I doing right now, or about my life? I'm sorry.
Anything, yeah. What do you do right now? Like, what do you do for a living? It could be anything. Because the reason why is, like, you're saying you're a retired guy in the forces, and I feel like we were at a dinner party starting to get to know each other. And within a few minutes, we're talking about the pineal gland and dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is not your normal dinner conversation.
Right.
You know what I mean? So let's go there. What are you exploring around that at the moment, and what have you found out?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the pineal gland, and my big statement these days is that if you really want to know what's going on in the spiritual realm and the universe, talk to the near-death experiencers, the shamanic practice type people, and the deep meditators, Dolores Canyon and Robert Monroe, and Edgar Casey. These guys who were really deep to where they leave their body And that's basically what we're talking about, is accessing that seat of the soul, the pineal gland that, it produces natural DMT. And near-death experiencers, what happens is you get close to death and the body thinks, okay, this is it. Time to release the spirit. And it releases a big dose of DMT and splashes the brain, and then you're rocketed out of your body. And this is what we've all, the near-death experiencers, this is what they're going through. And with and at night when you sleep, the pineal gland drops a little bit, and that's when you leave your body and soul travel, and you pretty much go home to our real reality. This is kind of a movie or a play that we're in. It's the sages call it a dream. And when you do leave your body, you look back at the dream and you're surprised that it was so convincing. So, the pineal gland is a little tiny gland. It's in the middle of our forehead, deep in the head, deep in the skull, and it's hollow, and it has rods and cones in it, like an eyeball, like our eyeballs, our physical eyeballs. And when it gets stimulated, it's frequency and vibration. This is when you drink ayahuasca, this is getting the vibration, the frequency of the plant gets your brain to where it believes it's a death situation. And
this is great. I can ask you a question though. Did you have to have a near-death experience to experience that pineal gland activation and the DMT, or was you aware of it before? With that?
Well, as a kid, I had a lot of things, with coming out of sleep, that state of waking and dreaming and sleeping. And, I saw a lot of strange things, but I didn't have any connection to it. I just thought, well, that was weird. It was certainly real, but I was asleep, and then I'd get up and go to work and be Bill. But yeah, I had things as a kid, and they were similar things to what happened with my near-death experience. These beings that I saw, these short little elf guys, and so yeah, that stuff is, these, like we were talking about, that this spiritual realm is all around us, dimensions, infinite dimensions of so much going on around us, and we're kind of not aware of any of that, and until you start having these things like Kundalini rising and stuff, and then suddenly it's in your life, and it's like, wow, this is crazy. And it takes years to sort it out with what's happening to your body's changing, and then you realize it's this really cool gift.
It is a gift,
never anything to worry about.
That's right, but it can take it can take a while to see it as a gift, can't it? Because once you have these experiences, and for me, when I had first had my awakening, I was just vibrating for days and days and days on end, thinking, is this ever going to end? Is this going to slow down? And what the hell is going on? Because it brought up so many emotions and different feelings that the body was trying to process. And it can be, pretty overwhelming. And I'd been exploring this work. It wasn't like I just stumbled onto it or it just happened instantaneously. But even then, nothing prepares you for it. I don't think really. You can do your best, but until you experience it.
So you were exploring the whole Kundalini process, and then it took off?
Yeah, well, what had happened, I did a shamanic journey about 2 to 3 years prior. I did an ayahuasca experience. I wanted to face some fears I had around different things. And that really started to open up my third eye. And it was just the one time I've done it. I've never done it since. I wasn't chasing the mystical. I was actually trying to heal aspects of myself that I was starting to understand was trauma. So that was my first taste of true surrender. and having that experience. So that really opened a portal to then ask the questions about, well, is this possible without the psychedelics? Is that my natural state and I'm in the dream right now? Or was that a dream and I'm in my natural state right now? You know, bigger questions were starting to come out of it. So from that, I started to explore more meditation and started to look at the chakras and things like that. But I still wasn't aware of Kundalini rising when it happened. I just knew that there was an evolution of the self to connect to the divinity. But I was still in its infancy. And I was exploring, working with sound, working with breath, and through different experiences over time, it just then went. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah, that will do it. That one trip to an ayahuasca ceremony, that will kick it off. And I had my near-death experience in '94, and when I retired in 2010, I read Straussman's book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and his volunteers that he was injecting with DMT were going and seeing the same things I saw. 3 little guys and then a taller, wispy guy. And there was so much love and acceptance and just joyfulness, sweetness. And it was the same sort of thing. So within a couple of years, I was down in the Central America at an ayahuasca ceremony with some wild shaman from Colombia. And I had a heck of a night with that. But, I think people that are, having this Kundalini rising, they're being prompted. They're being tapped on the shoulder and say, okay, you should go do this ayahuasca ceremony, and it becomes something that you get involved in almost, like you were led. And so, yeah, I had in '94, I had the near-death experience. I put it away. I knew it was real. And then that piqued my interest reading that book. So I go, well, this DMT thing, I got to check it out. So I went and I drank ayahuasca a handful of time over a couple of years. And one of those ceremonies was gnarly. And a lot came out of that. And then this whole Kundalini thing started moving again with the spine shaking and the, we're talking about the energies coming in the right side and going out the left, and it just kind of kickstarted it. And I think a lot of people talk about that when they go to a shamanic healing medicine ceremony, and within a year or two, this Kundalini energy is on the move, and you don't know what's happening. So yeah, I absolutely understand what you just said.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing, Bill. I'm curious as well, like in your sequence of events to where you are today and, integrating it all. And once you had your NDE, were you feeling energies like when you came out the other side, or did you literally suppress it, carry on with your day job and didn't tell us so? I don't, well, what did you do then before leading into the ayahuasca?
I think we're still connected. You kind of froze up there. But there you go. I was, after my NDE, I got back to work pretty quick and got back into character, because I had bills and stuff. But I started having this spine, I had it right after the NDE at home, this base of the spine, just this fluttering tailbone, like somebody put a impact wrench on you and, just went, and it would go on for, I'd be bouncing on the couch. And that happened every 2, 3, 4 years. And then a friend of mine said, I'm going to do this shamanic. It was like a drum and with some kind of thing. I don't know. I just went to be polite. And there was this part at the end. It was a sharing circle. There's some, it wasn't really my thing. But at the end, we were all laying on the ground and I just started bouncing. And that tailbone thing kicked in, and it was embarrassing because I was bouncing on the ground. And I asked the girl running it, I said, "Is this okay?" She goes, "Yeah, this is cool. Your energy's moving on you." And I'm like, this, wasn't part of my understanding at all. And I assumed I was now a Parkinson's sufferer or something like that, and I'd have to deal with that. But no, that when I got around something shamanic, it was like, dude, wake up. We're trying to get your attention. It was cool.
Yeah. And then when you said you had an ayahuasca experience that was gnarly, how would you describe it to people? Like, what is happening? Like, what's the body releasing? What are you coming up against? Why is it challenging? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I was with Taito Juanito and in Costa Rica, out in the jungle. It was about 20 of us, and it was 2013, I think.
Okay.
And the purge comes like within an hour, and just before the purge, the whole ceiling opened up, and I saw this spiral, like a DNA spiral, flying off into space, and all these colors were coming down. It was like some kind of transmission. And I woke up over my bucket, and I just, purged, and it was like it sounded like a jet engine, just a roaring sound, and it wasn't much. I hadn't eaten, you don't have a big meal and go into one of those things. And so it was very little liquid, and then this roaring sound, and I saw this bluish black, like mist, gel, vapor, liquid or something. It came out and it went, bounced out of my bucket and it went across the floor. And I was like, what the hell was that? And the shaman saw it, and he told one of his guys, go over there and sweep that out into the jungle, and told him where it was. And but yeah, it was this huge baggage. It was emotional baggage from many lives, or I was a fireman, so I saw a lot of sorrow and a lot of horrendous things happen to people. And I think a lot of firemen say, I think we carry that stuff, those emotions with us. What do they call it? Post-stress traumatic syndrome or something.
Yeah.
And that went, and my life changed the next day. I used to run 6 or 7 miles every day, and I ran my same course 3 times, and I wasn't tired or breathing hard or anything. And so those energies, they make us ill. It's a burden on our lives, and we're supposed to. We don't understand anything about what we're really doing here, but we're supposed to find ways to release that baggage. And that ayahuasca ceremony did that. And, the whole night, the rest of it I could explain. It was like Bill was, the guy I'd known my whole life, 60 years at the time. That personality was tied and gagged and thrown in the trunk. And this higher version of me was driving. And the guy in the trunk, Bill in the trunk, was scared to death, and he was putting up a fuss. And, your mind is, we're creators. So my mind was just bringing all that fear right into the ceremony, and it went on for hours. And one of the shamans came over, and they did everything they could, with the whipping and all that stuff. And I was just rolling on the ground, just drooling and moaning and farting, and it was really brutal. And he said, "You're going to have to find the courage to surrender to the softer you." And that made all the sense in the world. And I said, stop listening to Bill. Bill's full of fear. That's the human. That's what we are. And go with that softer voice. Go with that softer you. And everything cleared up in 10 or 15 minutes. It was absolutely blissful. It was incredibly euphoric. That energy was allowed in from from our home, from our real state, where we are these joyful, wonderful beings, with no problems. And that's how I spent the next couple of hours before they, wrap it up, go have some fruit and stuff like that. But I wasn't, the thing that was cool, there was a couple of other guys that went through that, and they were devastated. They were in the corner wrapped in a blanket, and they didn't talk for a couple of days afterwards. And that's normal, to go into the pit. And that's actually what the shamans are looking for, to take you into that pit. And you realize that you're not this person you've known your whole life, that you're this incredible eternal being. And, but yeah, I was, I took it really well. I was high-fiving those guys. I was like, man, how did you guys do that? That was crazy that you could do that. And, alter my perception to where I was looking at myself as, man, this guy needs to get over himself. And they were really happy. They were, they come by my room and stuff, and they were smiling, and they said, you did really well, because you weren't, completely plowed under by the experience. You understood what it was, and that you were seeing this higher self, this higher version of you that's always been there, but we don't know it. And, so yeah, and that's kind of, go ahead, Guy.
No, I was going to say, what did that do to you? Because that to me seems like a pivotal lesson. I was kind of, you were putting me back to my experience in ayahuasca, and there was a point where I had to make up my mind. It's like, I'm all in. I can either keep fighting this, the little me, or I can surrender and have absolute trust that something greater is taking care of me in this moment for my highest good. And
yeah, that sums it up. That's exactly what's going on. And
yeah,
most people can't do that surrender thing. It's really super hard. You're saying goodbye to your personality that you've always known. And like you said, you're surrendering and you're trusting that something really cool is going on here.
Yeah.
And most don't. It was,
I can understand, because it really feels like a death. It like, there's a part of me is like, my body thought I was going to die at one point, just through sheer fear. Not that it was happening, but just the how powerful beliefs and perceptions are, and what we buy into of who we think we are. And then when that gets evaporated or dissolved, and you come out the other side of that, it's like, wow, you can't appreciate how much they're actually governing our life, unconsciously. And, and I'm interested, when you had that experience, what did that do for you coming out of that, moving forward?
Well, they talk about you need to process what actually happened to you, and because it's so far-fetched, that we are these multi-layered beings, that there's a soul and a higher self and connected to this source, and it's all one. And it's like, okay, that all sounds good. But when you actually experience it, it's like, wow, this is real. This is not just some spiritual feel-good story. And, it took a couple of weeks, and my wife and I went to dinner, and I don't know how this happened, but we were walking in, leaving the parking lot, going in, and I just ran around the car, and I grabbed her by the shoulders, and I said, sweetie, there were 3 of me. There was 3 of me, and they were, and I was bouncing between the perception of all of them, and I was seeing this guy who was absolutely petrified of what was happening, that he was losing control. And then there was this other guy who was just sweet and non-judgmental and just going with it. And then there was me watching the whole thing at some other level. And yeah, I said there was these 2 guys that were trying to take control. And then I was watching the whole thing and taking it all in. And she goes, we need to get you inside and get a salad and, or something, you know, because she thought that's a pretty bizarre thing to say, but that's exactly what it was. And it, like I said, it took a couple of weeks and then it just came out of nowhere. And yeah, that's kind of what happened from there. And then after that, you know, I was no longer fighting anything. It's like, okay, everything's open to, for me to look at. There is no impossibilities at this stage. And,
totally.
so yeah, and then the Kundalini, symptoms started increasing, and then it was, I just want to mention it, make a mental note for listeners as they're listening. I've had 2 episodes with a gentleman by the name of Lawrence Edwards, and he's a beautiful, wise old man that supports people when the Kundalini is awakening. And I'd encourage people to check that out and his wisdom. Just a beautiful human being that's doing great things. While on that, I'm curious to your thoughts, Bill, because you've obviously had a few experiences when you were younger, then you've had a near-death experience, and then, you know, you've been leaning into some shamanic journeys as well as you explore, I guess, what it means to be human or what it means to be source, depending on which perspective. But I feel there's a lot of people waking up to this information and are curious, but sometimes can get caught up. Well, I haven't had a near-death experience. I don't want to do a shamanic journey, but I want to explore the self as well. You know, what would you say to people kind of sitting in that terrain? Because I know for me, even when I did ayahuasca, it was a huge, huge decision for me at the time, like ginormous, you know, thinking I could be saying goodbye to my old self here. Yeah. Yeah, that stuff's for real. That is for real. That's not a party. That's a sacred fluid, you know, the DMT. Just even on your exploration, because many people obviously haven't had a near-death experience. They haven't done a shamanic journey or anything, but are still very much interested in this path of exploration. You know,
oh, okay. And do you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So do you get people asking you your perspectives on where they should go, where they should start, how they should actually be with this kind of work? Because it really is, in some respects, not for the faint-hearted, but it's so rewarding at the same time. Yeah. You and I were talking about the whole thing earlier about if you want to know what the what's really going on in the world, talk to the NDE person and the shamanic practices and the deep meditators. And, you know, that deep meditation, you don't need anything. You just, you know, raise your vibration with how you're eating, you know, say goodbye to a lot of things that are popular today, like alcohol and drug use and, and, you know, all the energy that's coming into this world, this movie, this play, this simulation, it's coming from the sun, and we come from the sun, and, you know, eat that vibrant food that, Mother Earth provides for us, you know, the greens and the fruits and, the grains, and nothing processing, takes away the light. You know, everything's the light, you know, go to the light. And, so yeah, fill yourself up with light. Consider, you know, getting up in the morning before the sun rises and face the east. And if you want to open your eyes and watch the sun come up, you know, and do a meditation, Robert Edward Grant, he has this diamond meditation. If you look up his site, the short video, it's like 4 minutes, and thing is incredibly powerful. With the chants, the sounds that you make, and looking at the sun or in the direction of the sun. You know, a lot of, you know, the world today will tell you do not look directly at the sun. But I've been doing it for 5 years.
20 minutes, 30 minutes in the morning. And, whatever problems I was having with it, being an aging guy, they're gone. And when I go get my eyes checked, they're like, all that stuff cleared up. And so I think there's powerful energy there. And, that magnetic Mother Earth, we should have our bare feet on Mother Earth and be looking to that source energy, a great spirit. This is the formula that's been set up here, and we're kind of separated ourselves from it. And so yeah, do those things. Sit quietly in nature, be still, and empty your mind. Know that everything is fine, and just keep doing it. And every day, whatever time you can do, and you'll start. The other side will start opening up. And what happens with me is the room will start with colors. It used to take 40 minutes, a half an hour, but now it takes like a minute. And I just sit quietly, and all of a sudden, here comes the colors. They're moving in the room, and then the grids. And it's coming, you mentioned this, that it's coming in waves, and it's absolutely coming in waves. And, that's the whole world is looking at Orion's belt, the Pleiades, and NASA's saying there's a gravitational wave that comes from that area and pours over the Earth. And, the UFO people are talking about the Pleiades and ancient Egypt, the Giza, all the pyramids, they're all pointing at Orion's belt as some sort of source of some sort of energy wave. And yeah, you'll feel these waves and you'll hear the vibrations. And, after, if you get to the grids, and if you push past the grids, there are spiritual beings all around us. These beings of light, our ancestors, our friends that have passed, our parents, our pets, they're all around us. And, when you're opened up like that, your energy's opened up. And as they come close, it's just this incredible feeling of belonging and love and indescribable. Well, where we come from and how much we're cut off from it in these bodies. But you can get there through meditation. And that's the kind of the popular thing is, a lot of these podcasts, people are, sort of being guided to, you can't have an NDE, but you can do DMT. And they're kind of saying, and it's a really good advice, is that when you do a drug like that, psilocybin, DMT, you're going into a room that you weren't invited into. And it can be a really violent experience. And it can really be off-putting. Guy, you and I somehow survived. But it's like 98% are like, I am never doing that again. And
I'm not. I really feel like through my journey, and now with us facilitating the retreats, because we hold people in a container for 5 days, and we use movement with the body, we use breath, we use sound. Sound is such a visceral experience, especially the gong as well. And when you combine a gong with the breath, it can be an extremely transformative process. And the way I kind of look at this is really starting to hold a reverence for ourselves and a love for ourselves in a heart space. And if we're willing to begin to look at the wounds and heal ourselves, then the blossoming will naturally take care of itself as we move forward. But we're always seeking the blossoming and never wanting to address the wounds, per se, that I found. And when working with people's hearts and actually using the heart to raise the frequency of a contained space in a very sacred space in nature, which is what we do, incrementally each day, people start opening up and have mystical experiences in a very contained, curious, loving manner, not from this hunt or this chase. It just happens to be a bonus, if you like, because the actual work is the healing of the self, not the seeking of it, I suppose. That's how I kind of see it. And once I got my head around that on my own journey, it changed everything, and it gave me permission to let a lot of the chasing go, which was definitely part of my journey.
Yeah, that's cool. And it's we used to be pretty quiet. We used to be pretty, life was different. And now we wear foam rubber on our feet. We don't touch the earth. Everybody's hiding from the sun, and it's sort of, we're going to go back to that. We're going to go back to a very natural life in nature. And then it's kind of an ordinary thing to see your relatives that have passed on. And, when the Native Americans talked about seeing the grandfathers and stuff, they're all around.
Yeah, it's hard to take it. What does your experience look like these days? So you spoke about it used to take you half an hour to then get to the grid and go beyond. Do you find if you just allow yourself now, you can just sit into a meditative place and really expand into all the other multidimensional realities or frequencies that are not there, which is information as I see it, and tune into that and see the relatives and see the different landscape of the spiritual world?
And what was it? What
is that? What's like? What? Yeah. What does your experience look like these days? Then with that, is that what's happening for you? That you can just be attuned because of the journey that you've been on up until this point? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's awesome. Right now, my life is incredible. I know that we are these spiritual beings, and that we are down here in these containers, and we're having these experiences for some soul growth. And the near-death experience helped, the ayahuasca helped, and then this meditative thing to where somehow this Kundalini thing happened, and my frequency rose, and it's there all the time. There's this like vibration. It's going all the time. It comes out my fingers, and you raise your vibrations, as the yogis are talking about, and then you just sit still, and you can pop in to these other places, immediately within a minute or two. I was downtown. I got a smoothie, and I was sitting outside waiting for him to mix it up. I looked up into the blue sky, and it's like I'm in a snow globe. There's all these darting little dots of silvery, glitter, and they're on their waist places and stuff. They're souls. The whole universe is made up of conscious, incredible beings, and we're just down here to learn things, and they're all rooting for us. They're never judging us. They're rooting for us, and we're having these wonderful adventures, and it's super hard what we're going through, especially now. The frequency of the planet is going up, and that's not a joke. Fires in the 70s burned completely different than they do now. That's a rising in frequency, and all the weather changes and all this stuff. This is for real, and we have a choice. We can go with the rising frequency and keep pace with it. Clean up our bodies and eat vibrant food, and and it just becomes it's an incredible, wonderful party of a life. Or we can fight it and watch negative media and do things that aren't good for us. And people are going in two directions. That's very clear, and it's on a fast track. This eclipse recently, guy and I were talking, and we both felt it. I mean, it was a big push of this is for real.
Yeah.
It's going on, and it's cool.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? I look at this work, what I've kind of attempt to do in my life is look at the things in my life of what is truth, what is real, and what isn't of that essence of what is serving me, what isn't serving me. And it's like, you can start in the physical things, like by cleaning out your closet, right? To like disrupting and getting rid of all the junk you don't need. And then you can start to look at your food, and you can look at the things that you're doing on a daily basis. What is serving my highest good? Is it or isn't it? Am I even vocalizing my highest good? Am I living from this place, or am I just lying to myself? And it's like, as we chip away at all those things and start to get rid of the non-necessary, it allows us to move with the rising tide of frequency, as opposed to kicking and screaming, because for some reason, as human beings, think our world's going to implode and the ground's going to swallow us up or something if we lean into the unknown a little bit, and as opposed to just ride the wave of the adventure of it, which I find fascinating. Yeah.
It's a cool adventure. We're here thousands of times, and we're learning to be kinder and sweeter, and things like ethics and morals and integrity, honesty. These things, when we leave, we're going to be accountable for how much it was that part of our life, and that's how we learn.
Totally. And one question that's coming in for me, Bill, and I just get the sense thinking about my podcast listeners and things like that, because and I only want to hear the abbreviated version of it, but because I don't know what happened to you with your near-death experience. Now, I appreciate that you've had some of the most watched videos on YouTube when it comes to your NDE. And I started to watch it, and I purposely didn't, because I just loved the way you spoke and shared. And I thought, I'm just going to reach out to this guy and have a chat. And as we had a conversation, the conversation has taken this form beautifully today. But I know for a fact that many of the Aussie listeners will be like, well, what happens in that?
Okay.
In that. So just the footnotes, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I was a fireman, and in 1994, I was on an engine in Santa Barbara, and there was a flu epidemic, and it was a real epidemic. It was called the Beijing flu, and it was for about 3 weeks in 94. It had exceeded the CDC's limits for serious event. And we went to a patient, and I got exposed, and a couple days later I was super sick, and I went to the hospital, and they were filling me back up with fluids. It was a super fast dehydration thing, and they pushed some drugs that didn't go well with my condition, because I was super dehydrated. My heart rate was like 150. My blood pressure was 70 and 70 over 40, something like that. And anyway, when the synthetic morphine went in, I just tanked. And my wife was there. She said, "Your eyes rolled straight back, and you were gone." And it was 3:30 in the afternoon, and everything went crazy. They Narcaned me a bunch of times, and my wife started writing it all down. They put me in intensive care overnight, and at some point during that night, I left my body. And you get close enough to that death thing that it triggers this automatic thing where the soul will rocket out of the body. And I was flying through, and just found myself flying through this sea of stars, just this through space. And there was all these colored orbs, these colored stars all around. And it was absolutely euphoric. And I was saying to myself, man, what was that? Meaning my life as Bill. And I was like, that was gnarly. And, there was nothing gnarly about my life. It was a dream life, growing up in California and having everything I wanted. But, all those things with the emotions that really hold us here, we collectively call them fear, but things like jealousy and hatred and, competition and all these negative vibes, they were gone. That was absolutely not part of who we are when we leave here. And everything was incredibly high vibration. It was a euphoria. I've said over and over, it was like a cosmic orgasm, just continuous. And
wow.
And as I was flying along, all these beautiful stars, all these colors, it was welcoming and acceptance and belonging. And I was home. And I was saying to myself, how in the world did I believe I was this dude, Bill? It was such a trick, because I was still me. It was a seamless, flawless transition, painless transition. I was still me. I still had my sense of humor and my goofiness, but I wasn't Bill. And I absolutely knew that, Bill had died and he was no more, and I couldn't care less. And my body was, to me, it was like a banana peel. And it was like, just throw that banana peel away. I'm not going back there ever. And so I was flying along and I'm thinking, this is awesome. And then everything changed and I was in this like clinic. It was in a room and there were beings in front of me and there was equipment there, and it was, indirect lighting. The room was lit, bright, and there was equipment and beds and gurneys and things like that. And there was these 3 short little hooded guys, standing in front of me, and they were overjoyed to see me. They were giggling and bouncing around and saying things like, how was it? What did you learn? What can you tell us? And I was, extremely confused because I was in this incredible, realm, this heavenly realm where nothing was impossible. And I knew it was home. And then all of a sudden I was in this other place, this like in between place, this, clinic or facility. And so they were asking a few questions. One of the little guys with the hoods, he came forward and he looked me up and down real close, and he turned to the other 2 and he goes, he doesn't remember us. And they all giggled uproariously. And, I wasn't fearful at all. I was just wondering, how did I all of a sudden get to this place? It was a dimensional change, and again, seamless. And then there was this other guy in the background, and he came forward, and he was this really tall, wispy guy. And I've called him 100 different things, like a walking stick insect or a stretched out Gumby. And he was made of energy. He was like this spinning vortex, this whirlpool, and it looked like he was underwater. And as he came forward, he had this huge smile on his face, and you could just tell he was incredibly happy to see me. And as he came forward, he had this spinning vortex, and he kind of separated. Parts of him would move forward, and the rest of it would catch up. Really bizarre looking thing, but he was a sweetheart. And as he came closer, that spinning energy sort of enveloped me, and my throat just clamped down and my chest expanded. And I felt like I was going to drop to my knees and break down uncontrollable crying from love. There was so much love that filled me. It was overwhelming. It was incredibly powerful. And He was chuckling all the time. Every time I said something, he chuckled about that. And there wasn't anything really going on. It wasn't really organized. The little guys were giggling and bouncing around like the Three Stooges. And if you ever watch that movie, Communion, those, Richard or Christopher Walken, he goes into this, it's like maybe it's a alien abduction movie. I don't know what the story is there, but those little hooded guys look exactly like the guys I saw. But my guys had bright eyes and big smile. And if you watch that movie, it's supposed to be a horror movie, but if you watch it with the sound off, in the end, he's in there and those guys are bouncing around. They're dancing with him. They're high-fiving him. They're sweethearts. And it's right there for you to see. It's nothing to be fearful of. It's, I think this is, we have names for them, like guides and angels. Maybe here on Earth, when we perceive them, we come up with things like elves or leprechauns or gnomes. Our ancient ancestors weren't a bunch of goofballs. They were seeing these guys. They're of this place and they're of the other side. And I think they're kind of sort of orchestrating our journey here and keeping an eye on us. We go back for checkups, spontaneous healings, maybe have our minds changed. We're all in these facilities all the time. And I think when you have been around a long time, that veil starts to break down and you start remembering that you're in these places. And that's what this alien abduction is about. These are old souls that, the simulation isn't working for them anymore. They're seeing through it. They're bringing it back. So that's what was going on with me. And at one point, it wasn't very organized, but at one point I said to the tall wispy guy, I said, well, we're supposed to do a review of my life or something like that. You guys want to get started with that? Because I wanted to move on from that facility. I wanted to go back to where I just was. And I figured, well, I'm in there for some reason. And so I said that, you guys want to get started with that review of my life? And the tall wispy guy just cracked up. He just belly laughed and he thought that was hysterical. And he said, sure, let's do that. How do you want to start? And I told a bunch of stories about my life as Bill, and it wasn't a real life review with all these profound things that we learn about ourselves and how we've impacted others negatively or positively. It was none of that. It was just me yapping away about a bunch of things I thought would make them happy, and then I could move on. And I'm talking away and nobody's listening. They didn't care. They weren't interested in my story. And, I'm convinced it was just a show and tell. It was a tour of the dimensions that we find ourselves in here in our Earth journey, that there's a heavenly realm and then there's an in-between place and there's an Earth realm and there's the other place. And so at one point he said, okay, that's enough. Time to go back. And I was just shocked. And I was like, dude, no way. Go back. And I put up a fight. But he said, and very clearly, he said, you have to go back. You have things to do, and they're important. And, this was in 94. And those things are going on now. They've been going on for me, I've been talking about it for the last 8 or 10 years, but in the last 2 or 3 years, the whole world's, you can ask anybody that I know, anybody in my neighborhood, I'll say, have you ever heard the term NDE? And everybody knows what it is. And that was not how it was in the 90s. It was, you were a crazy person. So yeah, it's going on now, and the world's waking up, I think. And Guy, people like you and people like me, we're supposed to talk. We're supposed to tell our story, and others can, proceed on a journey.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. People come out of the woodwork all the time when you put a podcast out there. Like, I'm sure when they've watched your videos, right? They're like, you've been talking and that. It's quite mind blowing. There's a lot of spiritual closet junkies that I think are craving something more. So I was only listening to Michael Reverend Beckwith speak yesterday. I had him on the podcast about 2 years ago, but he was sharing that, he feels it's very important, just the conversations that are out there and creating intrigue, and so people will actually discover this for themselves and go on that inward journey. Because until you experience it for yourself, it's just theory. It's just somebody else's opinion, right? At the end of the day, which is beautiful. I want to ask you a question, Bill, before we wrap it up. With all that in the pot that you've experienced so far, up until the man I see opposite me on the screen today, what do you feel is the essence of our lives, while we're having this human experience?
Well, I think we're here to grow as souls. I think that, the universe is ever expanding, and we are being groomed to be creators, to be gods. Not the God, but to be gods that will continue the work of creation, and go out into the universe. And, there are countless planes, planets, dimensions, or however you want to call it, and incredible beings, and we're supposed to go out and work with that. And while we're here, we're supposed to grow, soul growth, and grow in our capacity to love. And when we grow in our capacity to love, then, when you pull out of your body and you see these different beings, they look very strange. They can be alarming in their appearance. But what we learn is to not react, to not start that whole negative spiral and create this fear, because we are creators. And if we create this sort of cascading thoughts of fear, then everything gets muddled. And we're here to learn to control our thoughts, to not react to anything, and to realize that we can't be harmed, and we are eternal, incredible beings. That's what we're here to do.
Thanks, Bill. It's a great place to end the podcast. I really appreciate it, man. Do you have people reaching out to you? Because you don't have a website or anything, do you? Do you have a book, or how do people connect?
I got to finish up this book. I'm just having too much fun. And and somebody told me years ago, I was like struggling with it, and it's like, oh man, all this stuff has happened. I got to catch back up. And then this guy told me, don't worry about the book. You go with the videos. And he said, this is going to be big. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then all of a sudden I started doing all these podcasts, and it's like, wow, he knew what was coming. So yeah, I'll write it all down before I, head home.
Yeah.
And that'll be my gift.
Video is absolutely a powerful medium. Obviously, I record them every week, and people can sit down with us, listen to us, and we can just be, a couple of people having a conversation about our experiences, really, at the end of the day, and inspire someone else.
It really, nobody could have guessed this was going to happen with the, it came out of COVID, and then the podcast, and then all of a sudden we all became experts, with these shows, and it's it's crazy. It's definitely a divine hand in guiding humanity. And, we have free will. We can figure out what they're showing us, or we can do whatever we want.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Thank you so much, Bill. Really appreciate your time, buddy. And I look forward to sharing this with everyone.
thank you, Guy. It was
Thanks,
great
my
talking
man.
to you, bro.